INFJs versus ENFJs. These types are similar to the point where in certain situations, it's very difficult to tell the difference. They have the same cognitive makeup or functions, but in a slightly different order. They are both intuitive feeling types. They are very people-focused and excellent with them, and they have many of the same strengths and weaknesses. In simple terms, they are the extrovert and introvert version of each other. Organizing. One noticeable difference between these two types is their organizational abilities. If you were to spring something on both of these types, let's say it's giving them 5 tasks to complete as quickly and efficiently as possible, that's going to take much more conscious effort to figure out and break down for INFJs. Whereas ENFJs will deal with it pretty well. Organization is often about doing things in the right order, ideally whichever way minimizes time and effort. That's not a natural strong suit of INFJs. It always gets complicated with personality types because certain skill sets are essential to function in life. And this is one of them. So you can't simply ask yourself, am I good at this or not? You have to figure out whether it's natural and easy for you, or whether it requires lots of conscious and concerted effort. When you have lots of tasks piling up, do you start to feel really overwhelmed? Or do you feel like you can deal with it fairly easily? Organizational skill is a noticeable difference between these types, and ENFJs very much have the advantage. Insecurities. Insecurities can often line up well with a type's inferior function. It's a weakness, but crucially one that is like the opposite of their main strength. So in order to use and develop it, you have to go against your main way of operating in the world. It's almost like you are undoing good work. So improving the traits and skill set described by a type's inferior function is both desirable for a person, but also involves a lot of discomfort. INFJs often worry about and struggle with real-time performance. You could think of it as performance anxiety. The way they counteract this fear is by planning in advance, something which they are extremely adept at. Situations where they have to jump in on short notice with huge amounts of uncertainty and chaos can throw them off balance. Again, this is a skill that you can learn. So ask yourself, did you have to learn it or not? INFJs are fundamentally intellectual types, to the point where they blur the line between thinkers and feelers. That comes with a certain level of detachment. Connecting with their bodies and the physical world is often an area of growth as a result, one that is immensely enjoyable and rewarding for them. ENFJs, on the other hand, are rarely going to struggle with those kinds of things. They may have their moments where it's a concern, but it's rarely a long-term issue. Being adaptable, flexible, and spontaneous is fairly easy for ENFJs, preferable even. They can handle fast-paced and crisis situations exceptionally well. They are balanced in that respect. And I think this notion of speed is a big difference between them. If you give both types a month to plan something, I would bet on the INFJ every time. If you gave them an hour, I'd bet on the ENFJ every time. So if you knew someone who could be either type, then drag them into a bit of chaos and see whether they get overwhelmed, flustered, annoyed. That can be a very good barometer. ENFJs are more than happy to jump into things and go with the flow, whereas INFJs tend to be much more measured and even calculating. If you're going to a party, the INFJ is going to ask lots of questions in advance to kind of mentally prepare, and the ENFJ will just say yes. Both types can wrestle with being too agreeable, being taken for granted, and worry about being perceived as, or actually being, pushovers. I would say that this is more of an ENFJ issue though. Like I said, both types do experience it, but INFJs slightly less so. INFJs are more willing to give people completely detached, logical appraisals and suspend that need to worry about people's feelings and reactions. It's like a logical mode they can switch into. In fact, it's not unusual for INFJs to be described as quite cold and detached, even when they're in a healthy, normal state. It's very rare for someone who's an ENFJ to be described that way, unless they're in a very unhealthy state. Even then, they tend not to go that way. Because INFJs are so good with people, that coldness is not noticed at first. But it's important to bear in mind that extroverted feeling is a tool for them. It's a means of interfacing with people, reading them, and adjusting accordingly, but not something that is implicitly valued. It's the means for them, and not the end. It's the way they go about things, but not always their aim. It can sometimes be difficult to tell apart INFJs and INTJs, whereas ENFJs and INTJs are going to look very different. ENFJs, on the other hand, are more imbalanced with this particular predicament. It's almost like they're simply too good at being likable, a comforting and enjoyable presence, accepting and listening to others, making people feel seen and understood. It's kind of masterful, but it comes at a price. And the price is those things not being reciprocated towards them. In fact, it becomes an expectation from the people around them. It's like they get people too used to a good thing. It's over-promising and over-delivering, then creating this pressure of expectation. Social stamina. This is a fairly easy and very, very noticeable difference. So either you are just interested in personality types and want to type the people around you because that's very useful, or you're wondering whether you are an INFJ or ENFJ. If you know for a fact that someone is an ENFJ or highly extroverted, you can use them as a measuring stick. Go to a social setting with them and see who runs out of steam fastest. Doing it just on one occasion is not going to be reliable because the person could just be tired or having a bad day, and vice versa. Introverts can be extremely social and high energy at times. They just aren't like that on average. INFJs are going to get tired of social interaction significantly faster than ENFJs. This is probably the easiest way to tell them apart, and it seems simplistic because one is an extrovert and one is an introvert, but it's more than that. It brings into play lots of the things mentioned before about being overwhelmed, feeling chaotic, and wanting to retreat into some kind of slower paced situation. Sensory overload. This is very much in the same ballpark. If you take both types to a sensory stimulating environment, like a nightclub, there are probably much better examples than nightclubs, because there are many reasons why you would like and dislike those. But either way, INFJs are much more likely to be overloaded and overwhelmed. Here are some questions you can ask yourself to help narrow things down. Are you more adaptable, flexible, and spontaneous, or more of a planner who likes to know as much as possible in advance before jumping into something? Do you have a huge amount of social stamina, even in group settings, or do group dynamics drain you and you prefer one-on-one interactions if you're going to be spending a lot of time socializing? Are you ever described as cold, overly logical, or detached? Could you ever be mistaken for an INTJ? Do you struggle with sensory overload?